And good morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning program Perspective. I'm Frank Haynes. My guest is a man I've wanted to interview for years. His name is James Hosty. At one time, Mr. Hosty worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He had a crucial position in Dallas in 1963. He was assigned to Lee Harvey Oswald. I believe you were Oswald's, what do they call it, case agent. Is that true, Jim?
Yes, I was the third agent to have the case assigned to me. The first agent, John Fain, the one who did interview him, retired, and then there was an agent in New Orleans had the case when he was moved to New Orleans, and I got the case assigned to me in October of '63 when Oswald moved back to Dallas again.
Your name has come up in several books and on television and this kind of thing. It revolves around a letter that Lee Harvey Oswald delivered to the office there in Dallas, to the FBI office. And the matter of fact, it was destroyed.
Right.
Can you tell us
Sure.
the story on this, please?
Certainly. To begin with, I might correct you on this. Lee Harvey Oswald was known mostly as Lee, by the way. Harvey is his middle name, but like most of us, he didn't use his middle name, so he was known as Lee Oswald. I might correct that to begin with. All right, now the note in question, I interviewed Oswald's wife on November the 1st, 1963, when we received information that she had moved back to Dallas, and we were looking for him as well as her. We also had a case on Oswald's wife, I might add. I went out and did a preliminary interview on Marina Oswald on November 1st, and at that time was able to determine that Lee Oswald was back in Dallas and where he was working. They didn't know where exactly he was living, but they did tell me where he was working and that he was living somewhere in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas.
You went to a Mrs. Payne's house.
Mrs. Ruth Payne. That was who Marina was staying with at the time. Now, Oswald got upset over this and wrote a note, I believe it was about the 12th of November or thereabouts, that he came into the office and left this note. Now, the note was unsigned, and when I first got it, I didn't know who it was from. I had thought it was from another one of my subjects. I had been mostly assigned to handling right-wing extremists, and this sort of behavior was more in keeping with the right wing rather than a person on the left wing like Oswald. So when I first got this note, I had thought it was from somebody else. It was unsigned, talked about, well, don't bother my wife, don't come talking to her. If you have anything to say to me, you come talk to me directly, or if not, I'm going to take this up with the proper authorities, or words to that effect.
Nothing really threatening or intimidating.
There was nothing at all. It was just a stay away from my wife type of deal, and it didn't say I'm going to do anything at all, not blow up any offices or blow up any police stations, as one person had said. It really just was sort of more of a complaint, I would say, rather than a threat.
It wasn't signed. How did you find out?
I found out when I interviewed Oswald at the police station after the assassination. He mentioned it, and in fact used almost some of the same verbiage that was in the memorandum. He was angry when I first went in and started talking to him. He said, "Oh, so you're the one that's been talking to my wife. I thought I told you to stay away from her." Words to that effect. And then he implied that that he was the one that had written the letter.
You didn't consider him a danger, a threat, then?
No. He was under investigation at that time as an espionage, as a Russian espionage subject, because that he had been 3 years in the Soviet Union, and that he had made a recent contact with the Soviet embassy in Mexico City under rather mysterious circumstances. So we were investigating him from that point of view, and there was nothing in his background to indicate any indication of violence at all.
So let's go now. Was it November 22nd or 23rd when John Kennedy was
22nd at
22nd?
Approximately 12:30 p.m. Central Standard Time.
You were having lunch, as I understand, near the
I
motor.
had watched Kennedy go by as a spectator. Now, the Secret Service is very jealous of their prerogatives, and contrary to popular belief, they did not ask for. In fact, they did not want any other federal agencies, any military intelligence, or anybody to help them. Therefore, I had absolutely nothing to do with safeguarding of the president. I would have enjoyed doing it if they had asked us, but they didn't want us to help them. So I watched him I was with an Army intelligence agent and a alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agent, and we watched the president go by. This was about, maybe a mile from where he was shot, and then I walked into a restaurant and started eating lunch. It was about 12:30.
Did you notice any lax security when it went by?
There was no security, about as lax as you could get. There were no Secret Service agents on the car with him. Now, that was President Kennedy's order. The Secret Service wanted to put agents on the car. If they had been where they had wanted to be, they would have blocked the shots. But as Kenny O'Donnell said, we had our choice between politics and security, and we chose politics.
There's no way you can contradict the President of the United States in that kind of order.
That's correct. Harry Truman would let you think that the Secret Service would order him around, but this isn't true. They wanted the people to see the president. They made all of the police cars get back away from the car. There was no Secret Service agents hanging on the car at all. And as we know now from the Secret Service testimony, they did no checks of any of the buildings along the route. They had nobody stationed along the route at all.
And the bubble top was
not placed on.
Would
there.
that have saved his life, you think?
It may have deflected. It was not bulletproof. It was plastic. It was more for rain protection, but it could have deflected the bullet, possibly. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that.
But Jim Hosty, with all of this bad feeling in Dallas about President Kennedy and all this advertisement calling him a communist and he's committed treason,
right? And
Adlai Stevenson saying, "Don't go down there."
Right.
Stevenson why wasn't there excellent security on Kennedy?
That I can't tell you. The Secret Service did the best job they could with the limited manpower they had. They had many state police and local police helping them. As I say, they had no federal agents of any type helping them at all. They didn't want them. That was their decision. You'd have to ask them that.
All right, that's out of your category then. But
Right.
It seems so strange to me that John Kennedy was... There's always been a rumor that the night before, a lot of these Secret Servicemen went out and drank and had a wild party, and they were not up to par that day. Is that just a rumor?
Well, I think that's been confirmed, but in all fairness to those agents, that they weren't drunk, they were sober, they were on the job. It wouldn't have done them any good. They couldn't have possibly gotten to the president in time. They were in the follow-up car several feet behind. As you remember seeing the film, the one agent jumped off and ran full tilt as hard as he could and just barely got to the president's car in time to jump aboard. They were not anywhere near. They couldn't have done any good because of the way they were positioned.
All right, let's get... How did you actually hear that Kennedy had been killed? You were in the
restaurant? I was in the restaurant, and I heard the sirens going by. Now, we knew that there was going to be a demonstration of right-wing extremists at the place where the speech was to be given, at the building. I forget the
Merchandise Mart.
I believe that was it. Yeah, at a mart, and we knew that there was going to be this demonstration. So when I heard the sirens going by, I figured, well, I guess the demonstration has started, and we had told the Secret Service about it. I had personally given the Secret Service 2 items of information about possible threats, including this one about the right-wing demonstrations. That was sort of my specialty, the right-wingers. And when I heard the sirens go by, I assumed that it was the right-wing extremists acting up down at the mart. Then one of the waitresses came out from the kitchen. She was crying, and she said, "The president has been shot." So again, I'm assuming it was the right-wing extremist. I immediately paid my check, rushed back to the office, and was told by a supervisor, "Get in your car and get out and get on the radio and stand by for instructions." I did that, and they said, "Proceed to Parkland Hospital immediately." I went to Parkland Hospital, and I got there, and I radioed in, said, "I'm here, what should I do?" And they said, the supervisor recognized my voice, and he said, "Come back to the office immediately." I went back to the office, and he said, "We've just received a teletype from the Bureau saying to immediately locate the whereabouts of all right-wing extremists." Now, this is the teletype that this clerk in New Orleans has gotten confused and said was sent out 2 days before. It was sent out about a half hour after the president was killed.
All right. Right-wingers, not left-wingers.
Right-wingers, right. And that was my specialty, and I knew who the different ones were, and they wanted me back to the office to immediately draw up a list of people who would be picked up for interrogation. I was doing that list when the telephone call came in that, by the way, when I was coming back from Parkland Hospital, I heard over the radio, our radio, that a police officer had been shot in Oak Cliff.
Tippit?
I found out later it was Tippit. Just a police officer had been shot, and several of our agents were on the way to the scene to check it out.
Right.
Because they thought there could be a connection, as it turned out there was. When I was back in the office drawing up this list, one of the agents who had gone to the scene, Bob Barrett, called in and said they had Lee Oswald in custody for shooting the police officer, and they were taking him to the police station. We knew at this time that the shots had come from the book depository, and a rifle had been found, and Oswald worked at that building, so therefore things started adding up in a hurry.
All right. So what happened next?
We immediately rushed. I rushed into the office, the SAC's office, found the Oswald file. A communication had just come in from Washington showing that Oswald had made contact with the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., similar to like he had made contact with the embassy in Mexico City. Now, this one in Washington, D.C. was by letter, in which he admitted having been in Mexico City, but I'll get into that later. I took this file into the SAC, and he called the Bureau and told them what we had. He was talking to Alan Belmont, who was the chief of operations, the number 3 man in the Bureau. When he heard that we had a file on Oswald, Oswald was now in custody, was the prime suspect. This is important. He now ordered me specifically by name to go up to the police department and brief the police department on what we had on our file on him.
All right.
Now,
by the way, were you shocked to hear Oswald is the...
Yes, because like everybody else, I assumed it was a right-wing deal. I understand that Earl Warren, when he first heard about the president being killed, came out publicly and blamed the right wing. Jackie Kennedy, when she heard that Kennedy had been killed by a communist, couldn't believe it. She thought it was a right wing too. And this was the big surprise that, of course, I didn't know all of the facts about what Kennedy was doing towards Castro at the time. If I'd known it, maybe it would have added up a little more.
Right.
But at this time, I could see no motive for a left-wing extremist to kill a popular liberal president.
All right, so you were ordered to go brief Police Chief, I believe, Curry, was it not?
Well, not the chief. He was in custody and being interrogated by Captain Fritz. And, of course, my main contact was with the intelligence unit of the police department. And that's when I ran into this Lieutenant Revel, who was the head of the police intelligence unit. Now, we had authorization to work with them when it came to right-wing extremists, but not when it came to matters concerning Soviet espionage. So I had never told him about Oswald prior to that because it would have been against the law. The law specifically forbade giving any information of national defense type espionage matter to local authorities. But I was authorized, in fact, was ordered to keep the police department advised of anything I knew about the right-wing extremists. So I had dealt with Revel in that respect. So I ran into him. He came up to me and said he had just returned from the book depository where he'd been searching the building, and he said that we have a hot lead. There's only one person missing from all of the employees, a guy named Lee, And I said, Jack, that's Lee Oswald, a communist, and he's already in custody upstairs. He's being interrogated right now. Revel then got upset, and he got mad at me for not having told him about Oswald. And I said, Jack, I couldn't tell you about it.
All right.
He then wrote up this memorandum, his famous Revel memorandum. Everything in it is accurate up until the last paragraph. In the last paragraph, he said, and furthermore, the FBI knew that this man was capable of this assassination. In other words, this was a conclusion, not a quotation. He based that on the fact that I was so sure that Oswald did it. He thought that I had known about Oswald's capability before the assassination, where I was talking about what I had learned between 12:30 p.m. and approximately 3 p.m. when this conversation took place.
Right.
Namely, he'd killed one police officer, tried to kill a second police officer, and he was missing from the book depository. The shots were fired from there, and so forth.
You never thought Oswald had this capability then?
I had no information of any violence on his part. There was nothing in the file indicating violence, and as I said, I had no reason to believe that a left-wing extremist would be taken to do something like this. This would be more what you'd expect from the Ku Klux Klan or somebody of that type.
And to repeat, this letter didn't indicate any violence.
No, well, the letter at that time, I didn't know it was from Oswald. I didn't learn that till I interviewed.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
No, it did not threaten violence. It merely was a complaint. Mrs. Payne, who, by the way, told the Warren Commission about it, the Warren Commission was told about the letter, and they failed to follow up on it. I don't know why, but she described the letter as being abrasive in nature. I think that would be a good way to describe it, as being abrasive.
Mrs. Payne or Mrs. Finner?
Mrs. Payne.
Mrs. Payne, where Marina Oswald
stayed, yes. He apparently told Marina and Mrs. Payne that he had left a memorandum or a letter with the FBI office.
I see.
And she said she had the impression it was abrasive in nature. And both Mrs. Payne and Marina Oswald alluded to that in their testimony.
I see. But it was not abrasive then?
Well, I'd call it abrasive, yes, but not threatening.
But as far as direct threats, blowing up,
right.
This kind of thing?
No.
And nothing about Kennedy in it?
Nothing whatsoever. It was about my interviewing his wife. Of course, at this time, I don't think it was even known Kennedy was coming to Dallas.
Yeah, because that was kind of spur-of-the-moment trip, as I remember.
Well, I think it was first announced that he would come sometime in November. It was announced back in September, but things hadn't been solidified, no. There was no publicity. We hadn't had any hard evidence that he was going to come until maybe about a week beforehand.
All right, so after the briefing with the gentleman from the police department, what happened then?
Then I went up to the police station into Captain Fritz's office, the homicide captain, where Oswald was being interrogated, and somebody had called ahead and said I was on the way up and that I knew about Oswald and I should come in and take part in the interview. So I was permitted. Myself and another agent went in and identified myself, advised him of his rights, and then he immediately blew up and he said, "Oh, you're the one that's been talking to my wife. I told you to stay away from her."
Then you knew.
Then I knew. Then it kind of added up, and I could tell from the way he was saying it and some of the same verbiage that it was him that had written this letter, not this other right-wing extremist that I had thought had written the letter.
This is historic. No notes were taken of this interview.
I took notes.
You have notes of this?
Yes.
Oh, great. Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, I wrote up the memorandum within 12 hours of the interview. I wrote it up early the next day, and it's a matter of record. My interview with Oswald is a matter of record. I was there from 3:15 p.m. until 4:05 p.m. on the 22nd and interviewed him. The key information, I would say, was that he admitted that the pistol that he was arrested with, which is identified as the pistol that killed Tippit, was his pistol. He admitted he was arrested with it. He admitted that he resisted arrest and that not that he had over his eye. He said, "I had that coming because I resisted arrest."
All right.
The big thing I thought was interesting was when I asked him about Mexico City, he blew up. That's the one time he lost his composure, and he was startled. Captain Fritz has said the same thing. He noticed the same thing. He denied being in Mexico City, but you could tell from the reaction, the way he denied it, that I caught him off base, so to speak. And
that's where he met with the KGB assassination team.
Right. He met with the head of the Soviet KGB assassination team for the Western Hemisphere. This man was either a full colonel or a one-star general in the KGB. And he is the man that, if anything was going to go down, as they would say, in the Western Hemisphere, would have to sign off on it.
Do you know his name?
His name is Valery Vladimirovich Kostikov, K-O-S-T-I-K-O-V.
Is he still alive?
I don't know. I would think that based upon the rank he held, he would have to have been, at least in his 50s, and it's been nearly 30 years. If he were alive today, he'd be close to 80, if not in his 80s.
Do you think any of these documents that Boris Yeltsin is going to release will include this kind of thing?
It's interesting. There is another. There are other Russian KGB agents that were in on interviewing Oswald in Mexico City. One of them came out recently and verified that he had been the one who had helped interview Oswald in Mexico City. Nedjerprenko, I believe, is his name, and he said that he might be willing to talk if the money was right. He's willing to sell his story. So it does confirm, contrary to, I know some of these screwball researchers try to tell you that Oswald wasn't in Mexico City. He was. We can prove it. They have different things that can prove he was down there. And besides that, the Russians admit he was down there. Nedjerprenko, KGB colonel, who was the station chief down there, said he interviewed Oswald. Now, he's still alive and apparently willing to talk.
Jim, how do you think the Soviets, your theory is the Soviets convinced Oswald to kill Kennedy?
No,
right?
I do not think that. That would not have been to their advantage.
What do you think happened?
Okay, here's what I think happened. This is the best thing based upon information available to me. We know that on June the 19th, 1963, President Kennedy signed a top-secret security finding authorizing the CIA to go after Castro and try to overthrow him. They wanted him overthrown, preferably before the 1964 election. The CIA made contact with one of Castro's cabinet officers. They were going to try to work an inside job, unlike the Bay of Pigs was an outside job, so to speak. They were going to try to pull an inside coup and get rid of Castro that way. Castro apparently found out about this. He then came out and threatened Kennedy on September the 7th, 1963. This appeared on an AP release in New Orleans, two New Orleans newspapers on September the 9th. On September the 15th, Oswald started making preparations to go to Mexico City. He arrived in Mexico City. He started to go to Mexico City on the 26th. He arrived on the morning of the 28th of September and was in contact, on the 27th of November. He was in contact with the Soviet embassy and the Cuban embassy several times on the 27th and again on the 28th, which, by the way, was a Saturday when the embassy would have been closed. He met with Kostikov. The Warren Commission admits his meeting with Kostikov, does not say exactly what his position was in the KGB, and implies it was a contact on a routine visa matter. It could not have been, because Saturday the embassy was closed when he met with him. So Oswald met with the Cubans as well as the Russians. Now, we also know this, that after the assassination, Fidel Castro, in one of his long, rambling, drunken speeches, alluded to Oswald's contacting his people in Mexico City, and that he had said something. The FBI then arranged to send 2 undercover agents down to Havana, Cuba, to interview Castro to find out what he was talking about. Now, this is something that if I would have been hung from the highest steeple if I had told you this, but now this is public information, I can tell you. The treasurer of the Communist Party and his brother, who was the editor of the Daily Worker, were both FBI undercover agents. 2 brothers named Childs, Morris Childs and Jack Childs.
Oh, really?
They went down to Havana and interviewed Castro. Castro thought he was talking to his friends. He then told them that Oswald had been to Mexico City and had told his people that he would kill Kennedy for them.
Oh,
They sloughed him off, said, "Oh, go on back." Well, according to Castro, he said his people did not accept the offer, just thought he was just popping off and discouraged him on it. He went back and did it anyway. Now, I think that possibly what happened is that Oswald saw an opportunity to do this and curry favor with Castro, and this is why he did it.
Do you think Castro approved?
He said he didn't. It was to Castro's advantage to stop attempts to overthrow him, certainly, and he did make the threat. But I wouldn't want to say that he authorized him to go ahead. No, he says he didn't. He said that they told him. They didn't tell him yes. They didn't tell him no. They just said, "Well, we'll think about it."
Well, what kind of curry would Oswald have gotten with Castro by killing Kennedy?
Well, he would have been a hero for saving Castro's life. What happened to the man that killed Trotsky? After he served his sentence, he went back to Russia and lived a life of luxury, didn't he?
I see what you mean, yeah. All right, let's go on. Time is going so fast on this interview.
Yes.
About the letter, can we get into that?
Okay, the memo that a letter that Oswald wrote. Yes, all right.
Yes, we talked about how it came about.
Right.
Now you know he. When you see Oswald, you know he wrote it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you're meeting with Shanklin, head of the FBI in Dallas at that
right.
time.
Now that occurred after Oswald was killed, and you must remember for almost 10 days. Lyndon Johnson was holding out. He did not want any hearings. He was adamant about not wanting any hearings. You see, he knew about the Soviet and the Cuban aspects of this case, and he was fearful that if what I had just told you now had gotten out, that it could have caused World War III. The American public would have been so aroused that they would have demanded that we invade Cuba, and that's exactly how World War I started, on a situation almost identical to this, where it was assassination, and he was fearful, so he did not want any hearings. And Oswald was now dead. The district attorney of Dallas had come out and announced that their case on Oswald was closed. And Johnson had issued an order to tell the FBI to take over all the evidence and report back to him on the matter. So it was several hours after Oswald was killed. It was in that evening, maybe 7, 8 o'clock that evening, that Shanklin called me in and said he handed me back the note, which he had never entered into the record. Now, see, the note had never been entered into the record and had not been discovered until after the assassination, when it came out, and then the note was brought to his attention. It had never been entered into the record. And Shanklin had kept it in his desk and had never put it into the record. It was just kept in the desk loose. He handed it back to me and says, "Here, Oswald's dead now. There can be no trial. Get rid of this." I was hesitating to do it, and he assured me that it was legal because Oswald was dead now, and there's going to be no hearings. Now, if we had known there was going to be a Warren Commission, then we should have kept it, right. But at this time, we were sort of in a window of vulnerability or something, so to speak, that there was no trial and no hearings were going to be set. And Johnson was insisting there be no hearings.
So you tore it up?
I was told to, and I, after being told to, I tore it up. Now, I had originally argued with Shanklin, Ken Howe, the supervisor, verifies this, that I said there's nothing to this. What are you getting so excited about?
What was he getting so excited about?
I think, and also based upon what Clarence Kelly has told me, is that apparently Hoover wasn't aware of the fact that we had an ongoing current active investigation of Oswald at the time of the assassination. We were investigating him as an espionage subject, not as a threat against the president. And that when he had talked to Lyndon Johnson, he hadn't told him that we had an ongoing investigation. And if he had known about, had been told about this note, this would have embarrassed him. Then he would have had to go back and tell Johnson that we were, not only were we investigating and currently investigating, but he'd left this note with the agent, and this would have embarrassed Hoover. Now, you have to understand, Hoover was highly sensitive and was very fearful of criticism.
Right.
So rather than tell Hoover about it, the assistant directors knew about it. Bill Sullivan, Assistant Director Bill Sullivan, admits that he knew about it. And one of the other assistant directors also has admitted he knew about it. So Shanklin had told the assistant directors, but they were trying to keep it from Hoover, sort of like the emperor's clothes. You don't tell the emperor everything he doesn't want to know. So this was a case of, well, the case is closed now. Oswald's dead. There can be no trial. There's not going to be any hearings. Let's get rid of it and not tell the old man. Then he won't get upset.
All right. Did you think that was the right thing to do?
No, I would have kept it, as I say, but I had a direct order, and I had to assume that Shanklin knew something I didn't know. Let's put it another way. Say I'm like a second lieutenant, and a colonel comes down and tells a second lieutenant, do something. You don't stand there and argue with him. You assume that the colonel knows something that you don't know.
Yeah, but Shanklin was not disciplined, and
No.
You were terribly disciplined, right?
Not for that. I was. It wasn't until after the Warren Commission came out that I was. Well, first I was given a letter of censure, which was really doesn't make much difference because letters of censure were so common in the FBI that they had lost their meaning. I wasn't really disciplined until after the Warren Commission came out, and it was because the Warren Commission had criticized the Bureau and had criticized me by name. They had criticized me for not having interviewed Oswald, yet I couldn't interview him under the existing regulations.
Well, I hate to say it, but our time is up, and I'll make this a two-part interview. I'll continue my conversation with former FBI agent James Hosty next Sunday morning, in a week, next Sunday morning from 7 until 7:30. And the topic, the assassination of President John Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. Join us then. This is Frank Haynes for Perspective. And good morning. Welcome to Perspective. This is part two of an interview with former FBI agent James Hosty. He was a case agent for Lee Oswald in Dallas. He got the case in October of 1963, and of course, President John Kennedy was shot and killed by Oswald the next month in November of 1963. A week ago, we talked about the note the FBI office had received in Dallas from Oswald, wherein Mr. Hosty said he was not in the office at the time. When he got the note, he didn't know who sent it to him. It was unsigned. He found out later on, after the assassination, when he was interviewing Oswald, that Oswald said he did sign the note.
No, he didn't sign it.
That he didn't sign it. That he sent the note. He brought it into the FBI headquarters. Jim, I may be a little bit wrong on some of these things, but
that's all right.
It ended up that after the assassination, the special agent in charge, Gordon Schlanker, I believe?
Gordon Shanklin.
Shanklin. Ordered you to destroy the note. You didn't particularly want to because you said there was nothing particularly dangerous in that note. The note said basically that Oswald wanted you to stop questioning his wife, Marina Oswald.
That's correct.
You had talked to her November 1st, 1963. She was back in Dallas like her husband from Russia. You were investigating not only Marina Oswald, but Lee Oswald, because they'd come back from the Soviet Union on possible espionage. situation,
That's correct.
not as a potential assassin of President John Kennedy.
That is correct.
All right. After the assassination, you saw the procession go by in Dallas on that Friday in November. And then a few minutes later, you were in a restaurant. You heard that some shots had been fired. You rushed to the office, I think. And finally, you got word that Oswald had been arrested on killing Officer Tippit. You then found out that he may be tied into the Kennedy assassination. It was hard for you to believe. But it turned out to be true. You were called to Dallas police headquarters to be in on the questioning of Oswald. You took notes on that, I believe.
I sure did. Mm-hmm.
And at that time, he said he was the one who brought the note in. You had not known up to that time.
That's correct, yeah.
The one. A lot of things have been written about that note. It was depicted in the movie JFK, Oliver Stone's movie, and a lot of people have written on it too, saying different things, that he threatened to blow up police headquarters or FBI headquarters. You say nothing like that was in the note at all.
That's correct.
We talked about later on, J. Edgar Hoover wanted to fire you after the situation with the note came out. He didn't want any taint on the FBI.
No, it wasn't the note. No, he didn't know about the. That wasn't the reason. He wanted to fire me because the Warren Commission had criticized me by name.
I'm sorry. That's
Yes,
right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The Warren Commission had criticized you by name for what now?
Well, for not having interviewed Oswald when, under the regulations, I couldn't.
That's what I want to ask you about. You could not interview Oswald during that time, even if you had found where he was living. You didn't know where he was living, right?
That's correct.
Why couldn't you interview Oswald?
Well, because he had made contact with the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. The CIA had coverage on the Soviet embassy and was able to detect this. We had a strict order that if a person was being investigated for an embassy contact, they could not be interviewed without specific written permission from FBI headquarters. Now, in this case, because it was the CIA that had developed the information, FBI headquarters would have had to have gotten specific written permission from the CIA to do this. The reason being, if we'd gone and interviewed somebody and said, hey, what were you doing going into the Russian embassy in Mexico City, that would tip off the person that we had this coverage. This was a very, very sensitive situation at the time. Nobody knew that the CIA had the capability of detecting people contacting the Soviet embassy. And if you let a person go out and be interviewed on one of these contacts, you'd give away the source of the detecting of the information. You'd tell more than you'd receive.
All right.
He would just deny it and then turn around and tell them that, hey, they knew I was in Mexico City.
All right. It's been proven he was in Mexico City before.
Yes, I'm convinced. I know some people are trying to put out the word that it was a fake Oswald, but now I notice that the Soviets, the KGB now, is coming out and admitting that they did interview him in Mexico City, and I think one of the KGB agents is still alive and said he was one of the persons that interviewed him and is going to write a book or write something about it, and they're admitting that he was down there. We also have a letter in Oswald's handwriting in which he mentioned being in Mexico City and being in contact with them down there.
Also, he went to the Cuban embassy, did he not?
Yes, I didn't know that at the time. That information came out after the assassination, but he apparently, the way they found out is Oswald made a telephone call from the Cuban embassy to the Russian embassy. That's how they picked it up.
What was he doing there, Oswald? What was he?
He was trying to get permission to go to Russia via Cuba. He wanted to return to Russia. Now, we do know from information that has been made public that Oswald, when he went to the Russian embassy, said he had some information so vital that he felt that they would reward him by letting him return to Russia and go to the city of his choice, namely Odessa, which is on the Black Sea. It's well, I guess it would be the equivalent of, say, San Diego or Miami would be in the United States. Oswald's wife said that he liked it in the Soviet Union, but he wasn't too happy with the climate. Now, Odessa had a mild climate, and he was going to go back to Russia, and they were going to put him in a city that he liked the best.
Is that? It gets so complicated. I thought he got out of the Soviet Union to come back to the United States because he didn't like it there.
Well, apparently that wasn't true. He was trying to go back now. So maybe that wasn't the reason he was coming over. See, these are all the things that add up. I mean, things aren't what they appear to be, particularly when you work in espionage matters.
Well, do you think he came back to the United States to kill President Kennedy?
Oh, no, that wouldn't be possible, because when he came back, President Kennedy, I take it back. He was president at that time. No, I don't think that was the reason, no.
This idea developed while he was in the United States then.
In my opinion, this is only my opinion, I think he got the idea when he saw the story about Fidel Castro threatening President Kennedy. Fidel Castro found out that the CIA was trying to overthrow him, possibly kill him in the process. I guess when you overthrow somebody, it's a 50-50 shot that something's going to happen. Castro threatened Kennedy in words to the effect, American leaders better be careful and not trying to overthrow Cuban leaders because they might find out that they're in danger, or words to that effect.
We talked about this on the last program somewhat. Mm-hmm. And that didn't get very much news coverage.
No, because the liberal press didn't want to report it for one reason, the conservative for the other, but it was reported in both New Orleans newspapers, where he was living at the time.
And now Bay of Pigs had happened by that time, right?
Bay of Pigs was in 61. Cuban Missile Crisis was in 62. I think you got to think of the Cuban Missile Crisis in this, too. And then this was in 63, in September of 63, when Kennedy authorized the CIA to go after Castro again.
All right. This was a serious thing to try to assassinate Castro, right?
Well, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've read so much about it. I don't know what's true on that either.
Well,
but
he definitely was ordering an attempt to destabilize Castro and overthrow him, and as I say, when you try to overthrow somebody like that, it's a 50-50 proposition that he might get killed. Now,
that's against the law now, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. Didn't we take our friend Noriega out down there? And
I'm sorry. I'm talking about actually killing a leader of a country.
Right,
a communist.
Well, they don't. We're not supposed to get involved, but see, sometimes in the overthrow, they authorize a group or encourage a group to do it. They don't always listen to you. It's like turning an attack dog loose. You can't be sure what's going to happen.
Right. Do you think Oswald, in his own mind, decided to kill Kennedy? I believe you said on the last program he wanted to curry favor with Fidel Castro.
It would appear that way, because from what we found out, that he went down to Mexico City and offered to the Cubans to kill him. He said, somebody ought to kill him, maybe I ought to do it. I think that was how he was quoted.
All right, the Jack Ruby thing is one of those things that's almost unbelievable.
It is.
You remember that.
I sure do.
Do you think there was anything kind of a tie-in with Jack Ruby, people trying to get rid of Oswald after Oswald got rid of Kennedy?
No, I tell you, there's something that people overlook on this thing. That is that Oswald was supposed to have been moved at 10 o'clock. The chief of police told the press, if you're back here at 10 o'clock, you won't miss anything. They intended to move Oswald at 10. The reason he wasn't moved at 10 was because a Secret Service inspector and a postal inspector came up to the police department and asked for one more interview. So the homicide captain, Captain Fritz, said, well, let the press wait, we'll let you finish this interview. So the interview, the removal was delayed for an hour and 21 minutes. Now, Ruby was home in bed at 10 minutes after 10 because he got a long-distance telephone call, person to person. As you know, on your phone bills, it shows exact time you get a phone call. We know he got this person-to-person call, which he accepted at 10 minutes after 10. The call was from one of his strippers who wanted some money to be wired to her. He went to the Western Union and wired the money just as he said. There is a timestamp on the telegram showing 11:16, I believe, there's a clock in the background showing him shooting Oswald at 11:21. Now that's cutting it too close.
Right.
Now, how did he get in the basement? He walked in. There's a witness that saw him walk in, but the police department tried to say that wasn't possible, and the FBI, in order to go along with the police department, didn't want to embarrass them any more than necessary, didn't press them on the issue, but there was a witness that saw Ruby walk in right past a police officer. He was momentarily distracted because a car had tried to come into the basement. He stepped up to block the car from coming in, and Ruby walked in right behind the police officer while he was distracted. Well, there's only one police officer up there. He couldn't be keeping cars out and keeping people out at the same time, and Ruby was well known to the police. He had been allowed free access that whole weekend. He was as close to Oswald on Friday night as he was on Sunday morning. If he'd been sent in to silence him, why did he wait from Friday night till Sunday morning? He could have killed Oswald any time that weekend. He was that close.
Why did he kill him?
I think, just like he said, he had a hair-trigger temper. When Oswald came out of the jail, out of the elevator in the jail, he walked out and saw the lights, and he had sort of a smart-alecky smirk on his face.
Mm-hmm.
And Ruby said that just kind of teed him off, and he just lost his temper and rushed up and shot him.
You don't think right before then he necessarily planned to kill him? It was a spur-of-the-moment thing, right?
I think so, because if he'd been sent in to kill him, if he was a contract killer, he would have done it earlier. And besides, what good would it do for, say, the mafia, some people try to say, to have Oswald killed and then have Ruby there, who could then lead them back to the conspirators? I mean, that doesn't do any good. Just exchange one person for another that could lead you back to the conspirators. Just doesn't add up.
All right, so he died. Ruby died later of cancer.
He died unconvicted, I might add. A lot of people don't realize this, but the Court of Appeals reversed his conviction on 2 points. Number one, they say the trial should never have been held in Dallas, that it should have been changed to another city because of the hostility of the Dallas jurors to Ruby. And number two, they used statements that Ruby had given to the police to prove intent. And when Ruby was interrogated, not only was he not advised of his rights, but he was told, "Now, Jack, this is off the record, but why did you do it?" Then after telling it was off the record, they turned around and used the statements against him in the court. And the courts said that he couldn't use those statements, and that the trial should be held elsewhere. So the conviction was reversed, and he was awaiting trial when he died of cancer.
I'd forgotten about those. He hadn't been convicted. You're right.
It was reversed.
Yeah.
So he died unconvicted.
Yeah, that's right. But it was just a few years later when he did die, wasn't it?
It was within 2.5 years, and I don't think that without those statements that they could have gotten him for anything more than second-degree murder. Second-degree murder in Texas, they usually walked after about 5 to 7 years, and he'd already served 2.5. He probably would have been out in 7 years.
Jim, you questioned Oswald for about 55 minutes, as I remember.
From 3:15 to 2:50 exactly. I put that on my log, yes.
All right.
Or 4:50, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So did you think he was guilty of killing Kennedy from his appearance and what he said?
He never made any admissions. The only thing that...
What were his actions like?
Very cool, very calm. He didn't act like a person who was hysterical, didn't act like he was intoxicated or under influence of anything. He was very cool. He knew what to answer and when not to. The only thing that pertinent, I thought, was that he admitted that the pistol that he was arrested with was his pistol.
That's right. You told us that last time.
Yes. I think the one significant thing is now remember I had authorization to interview him, which I didn't before. Captain Fritz asked me if I wanted to ask him anything, and I asked him if he'd ever been in Mexico, and he said yes, he'd been to Tijuana. I said, "Ever been to Mexico City?" And he looked, and he startled, and then I could tell he was upset with this, and then said no. Now Captain Fritz noted the same thing, that it seemed to throw him off stride a little bit. That was the one time that he seemed to be off stride when I asked him if he'd ever been to Mexico City.
When did he go to Mexico City?
He was in Mexico City from September the 27th through October the 2nd.
Right, about a month before the assassination.
Correct, yeah. See, he had a tourist visa, and his tourist visa was stamped in. The Mexican authorities showed him coming in on the 27th and leaving on the 2nd.
What kind of personality? He's been called a loser, perhaps a sociopath, not really very intelligent. How would you describe him?
He was intelligent. He had an IQ of 118. He was tested twice, and he came out with the same score both times. So 118 is considered pretty much above average. No, he was not this is what they want you to believe. You see, the government was worried about World War III starting. I think I've mentioned this
With
earlier.
Lyndon Johnson.
They would have liked to have Oswald turned out like Hinckley turned out. Now we know Hinckley is now a certified psychopath. I don't think Oswald was. If he had been, he couldn't have gotten through the Marine Corps boot camp.
You're right. He was in
one.
the Marines. Yeah.
Yes, he served 3 years in the Marine Corps, and he wouldn't have gotten through boot camp. And number two, he never would have gotten out of the psychiatric hospital in Moscow. Remember, when he defected, the first thing the Russians did was put him in a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks.
Why was that now?
Well, supposedly they said he tried to commit suicide, which may or may not have been true, but I think this is what they do to any defector.
Yeah.
This is part of, remember the KGB controls the psychiatric hospitals.
That's right.
If Oswald had been like some people have tried to maintain a CIA plant in Russia, he would have lasted, maybe 15 minutes under interrogation. This is a 19-year-old kid now, 20-year-old, comes in there. The Russians slapped him into a psychiatric hospital where they could have used all sorts of techniques on him, sodium pentothal, the whole works. He wouldn't have lasted any time at all, and they would have broken him had he been a CIA plant. They had him under observation for 2 weeks there, then released him, sent him to Minsk, Russia, and according to what the Russians now admit, they carefully followed him and monitored him for 3 years while he was in Minsk, and are convinced that he was not a CIA plant. Then they permitted him to marry the niece of a high-ranking police official.
Yeah, that was Marina Oswald.
That's correct.
Tell me something about her. You were investigating her, were you not?
That's correct.
Because she...
Well, because she fit the criteria. We had a program going on. We had information that the KGB was going to try to plant what we call sleepers or illegals or moles in this country under the guise of immigrants, that they would be long-range plants, and that they would come in as immigrants in various forms. And we had a screening program. We were looking for people young enough with the right education. Now, Marina was a pharmacist. She would be the equivalent of a registered pharmacist in the United States. She had a good education. She was of the right age and everything, so we were looking at her as a possibility of a long-range plant.
I see. But nothing ever came. She's still alive. And
she's still living in the United States. I don't believe she'd ever taken out U.S. citizenship.
Do they have a daughter, I believe? Or
she had 2 daughters by Lee Oswald, and she's since remarried and has a son, I understand.
Oh, is
by
that
her
right?
second marriage, yeah.
How does she stay out of the spotlight?
Well, she hasn't. She's been interviewed and been on different programs and so forth.
What is she? I haven't seen or heard of any of the about much of these.
Well, she's...
Anything dramatic at all? Or?
No, not to speak of, that I can think of.
Let's talk about the movie JFK. It created so much controversy, the Oliver Stone movie.
Right.
You think it's just ridiculous?
Well, yes. I mean, if they had done like they did on the movie on Ruby and said that this is a facto-fictional thing, that this is part fiction and part fact. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, and this is partly made up, then it probably would have been all right. Now, he's taken what is some facts and then twisted it around and added in things and pretended that they're facts when they're not.
And you're not portrayed correctly, right?
No, I mean, they told me, by the way, when I heard they were doing this, I had an attorney contact them, and they lied to my attorney, and they said they were not going to use my name, and then they turned around and
really?
did the exact opposite, yes.
Can't you sue on that?
No, because of the fact that when he put my name in there, he said, well, I'll bet this is what happened. He put it into a speculative sort of way. This would make it difficult to prove. This is what I'm told.
When Stone testified before a congressional committee, he also used your name.
I don't believe Stone. Did he testify? I don't know.
It was on C-SPAN.
Oh, I didn't see it.
It was very recently, maybe a month ago.
Okay, I didn't see it. And what did he say then?
Some of these Congress people seem to be so enamored. He is a very forceful kind of person.
Oh, I see.
But he also got I believe you said, an award from Fidel Castro.
Well, from what I read in a magazine talking about him, is that he got the idea to do this movie JFK while he was in Cuba, receiving an award for another movie he did on El Salvador. And while he was in Cuba, somebody gave him the script, which was for the movie JFK. So when you think that possibly that Castro is the motivation for this thing, you begin to wonder about, he gets the idea while he's in Cuba. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that was it, but I'll use a little innuendo like he did and say, I wonder if.
Right. He wonders if, well, he talked about, I guess, the CIA. He inferred CIA military complex assassination. President Kennedy. Is all what you got from the movie? Or
yes, right.
Yeah. Did you watch the whole thing?
Yes, I sure did. Yeah,
including the depiction of you rushing into the
ugly-looking fellow they had playing me.
you were just 39 years old at the time.
At the time, that's correct. Yeah.
How is this? Do you have any regrets on anything you did? Let me ask you this: if that note, when you opened it up, had said. I am going to kill some high official in the United States if you don't leave my wife alone, quit questioning her. Yeah. Signed, Lee Oswald. What would have happened then?
Well, we would have, of course, gone out and interviewed him and reported it to all the authorities and taken action to stop him, certainly. Now, I might add here that Stone depicts me as being maybe in on the conspiracy and letting the assassination of Kennedy go ahead. Everybody that knows me knows that I was then and I am now a staunch supporter of President Kennedy. Everybody seems to think that everybody in the FBI and the CIA were all little clones of J. Edgar Hoover. Actually, probably close to half of the agents in the FBI were pro-Kennedy. And I understand the same is true of the CIA. So to say that something like this could be brought off with all of the pro-Kennedy people is ridiculous. And I'm one of the persons who was pro-Kennedy, and I still am.
Why was that? Was it the party, or they just you like Kennedy? Or
yes, I liked him. Yes.
Things certainly have changed. He was a great inspiration at that time. Right. Well, most of the American people, obviously, because he was elected president of the United States, like John Kennedy, but not everyone did.
No, that's true.
The Kennedy controversy has gone on and on. I think that's part of it.
Yes.
Not only John Kennedy and things we find out all the time, his brother Bobby and Teddy, of course. So how would you like to kind of put a cap on this thing, Jim? Anything else? We were going to talk about certain things. Maybe I've forgotten you wanted to bring up. Do you think this will ever be nailed down?
Well, I think this thing is political. I do think that a lot of this is what we call in intelligence disinformation. I do think a lot of the controversy is an attempt on the part of people to draw attention away from the true facts of the case. They shouldn't be concentrating on who did it or how he did it. I think that part is, we know who did it. It was Oswald. We know how he did it. I think what they don't want you to look at is why did he do it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this is disinformation to draw people's attention away from the why.
The why.
The why. And we'll never know 100% certain because Oswald is dead, but based upon the information available, the weight of evidence, as lawyers would say, would indicate that why he did it was to further the pro-Castro situation. He was trying to do it for pro-Castro reasons. Remember, the Monday before President Kennedy was killed, now this is interesting, on the front page of the Dallas Times-Herald, they had changed their policy towards Kennedy and Castro following the Stevenson episode. They reported a speech that he had given in Miami the previous weekend in which President Kennedy was urging the Cuban exiles to have at it again and try to overthrow Castro. It was a very anti-Castro, pro-exile speech that he gave in Miami. Of course, some people would say that was political, that he was trying to curry votes, as politicians will do, but that would have inflamed Oswald.
All these outsiders, people like Mark Lane, have spent their entire lives, some of them at least, and so many books about Kennedy. Mm-hmm. Do you think this is, somebody said recently it's part paranoia, part profit, and something else?
I still think it's disinformation mainly.
Disinformation?
Yes, I think it's deliberately to try to draw people's attention away from the truth as to the why. The Warren Commission did not tell you why. They knew everything that I have told you here, but remember, President Johnson was fearful of World War III starting. I think that was a real possibility had the American public been told why. This could have inflamed the public the way things were going. Yes, we were only a year away from the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
Remember the Assistant Secretary of Defense talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis when he was criticized for misleading the press early on in the missile crisis, said that the American government not only has the right, it has the obligation to lie if it means the prevention of an atomic war. This was Arthur Sylvester, and President Kennedy defended him and said, yes, that's right. So President Johnson was doing that very same thing, that had the American public been told the whole truth, it could have led to World War III.
Do you think it would have?
I think it's very possible, yes. I think that's what they told Earl Warren. Earl Warren, you know, originally did not want to head up the Warren Commission,
right.
And he turned it down, and President Johnson called him into the Oval Office and had a heart-to-heart talk with him, and when Earl Warren came out, he said words to the effect that if he was told if he didn't take it, this could lead to an atomic war. Now, the mafia doesn't have atomic bombs. The right-wing extremists don't have atomic bombs. Who does?
Well, we do, and the Russians do.
Right. So.
Well, it's very interesting. I don't know. There's so many interpretations. Some of the interpretations are completely out to lunch as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
Like the changing of the casket and the changing of the body.
That would mean his wife would have to be in on it. The so-called Irish mafia, O'Donnell and Powers and what was his name? The other one that O'Brien, Larry O'Brien, they were all with the casket and never left it.
Right.
That would mean that his closest friends were in on it.
Right. All right. Jim, you're going to write a book on this?
Well, yeah, we're trying to get a publisher right now. If you know anybody who would be interested, I'd be glad to talk to them about it.
All right. Anything, we have a few minutes left, anything I overlooked or you want to emphasize here at the end that kind of capsulizes?
Well, I think the point I'm trying to make is I think that a lot of the researchers are honest people that have been duped by people who are, as I say, trying to furnish disinformation. So many of them don't know how to interpret FBI reports, CIA reports. They let their personal prejudice enter into their research. It's what somebody would call blindsided research. I think to a certain degree the House Assassination Committee went into the investigation with their mind made up that it was organized crime. They didn't broaden the thing out. They didn't want to get into these other phases. Of course, here again, they didn't want to get into the foreign conspiracy part. Understand that one of the people from the House Assassination Committee said that they had decided unless they could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt and to an absolute certainty that Castro was involved, they weren't going to make any mention of it. And they didn't.
So you think it was a communist who killed John Kennedy?
Oswald was definitely a Marxist. He did it for left-wing ideological reasons, in my opinion, based upon the evidence available, that he did it because President Kennedy had authorized the CIA to go after Castro.
Thank you, former FBI agent James Hosty, for being on Perspective this morning. That's our two-part broadcast. This is Frank Haynes.